Yeah. Okay, we've only got a short space of time that we've got Dr. Hugh McDonald online. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Biripi peoples on whose country we meet today. And I acknowledge and respect the guiding agency of the peoples, the land and the waterways. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Hugh McDonald, who's a research director with the Victorian Law Foundation. So Hugh will speak about the public understanding of the law survey and the research findings regarding legal capability and its impact on access to justice, or as indicated by the research, access to a just resolution. So thank you, Hugh.
Hello, I can't see you, but if someone can acknowledge you can hear me. Hello?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, we got you.
Okay, great. Just give me 1 sec. I will get set up. If someone can tell me what you can see my slides.
Yep, we got your screen.
Oops, hang on, it's not going through. Just give me 1 sec. You can still see my slides?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks for the invite today. Looking forward to presenting our work, and we should have time for some questions and answers before I need to run away at 11:45. But to begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country from where we're meeting today. In my case, that's I'm joining you from Wurundjeri land. Pay my respects to their elders past and present, extend my respects to elders of the other lands from which we're meeting today, and pay my regards to First Nations people in attendance. At Victoria Law Foundation, we recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice and marginalisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better, more equitable future for all of us. So today I'm just going to talk through some of the findings of our public understanding of law survey. So that's a survey of legal need and capability. It's a probability sample tapping into the actual lived bottom-up experience and views and behaviours of just over 6,000 Victorians. And with the method that we used, this provides a representative insights for Victoria. Just quickly, I'm going to mainly speak about volumes 2 and 3 today, but some of the findings from volume 1 are important. They provide some important context, largely in keeping with the findings from the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales Legal Australia-wide survey. So we see strong patterning of justiciable problem experience, particularly by legal matter characteristics and socio-demographic characteristics. And what we see is an inequality across the community in problem experience and resolution. But what Pulse does, it provides some updated data on legal needs, and it provides some new insights on particularly problem duration and also a measure of met and unmet legal need. So what we saw in Victoria is some quite high rates for unmet legal need. It's actually the norm, not the exception. So more people will have an unmet need than a met need. There's no reason to believe this would be any different for other parts of the country, but what we need is a new national legal needs survey to know for sure. And so this report has much more details on problem prevalence, action, help, outcomes. So if you're interested, delve into that. But in a nutshell, legal needs unequally distributed across the community, strongly patterned by legal matter characteristics, including the type of matter, the severity of the problem, socio-demographic characteristics as well. Generally, we see higher prevalence and poorer outcomes amongst more disadvantaged population groups. That shouldn't be surprising to anybody who works in public legal assistance. What we did find in this report, though, was that legal problems have a longer duration than we previously thought. Previously, we thought, taking a sort of a narrow view of what access meant, we thought that when people were connected with a legal assistance service, be that public or private, that generally speaking, their needs would be met. What we found here is that's just not the case. So even after people access legal advice, dispute resolution process, and what have you, they're failing to get out of the legal system and the advice services, justice processes, what they need to meet their needs. So in volume 2, we understand the understanding and other aspects of legal capability. And what we found is that legal capability, well, it really matters. It really affects things. It's a real thing. And so with Pulse, we can see it and we can see how it affects and helps explain legal problem solving behaviour. Like legal need more generally, we see an unequal distribution of capability across the community. There are clear links to disadvantage there, but really legal capability adds another layer of inequality or inequity in access to justice. It's got an independent and significant effect. We think the better understanding of legal capability can really help to shape service provision to better meet the diverse needs across the community, to better meet the diverse legal capability needs across the community. And it might be useful and key for optimising resources, improving outcomes. But first, what is legal capability? Here's some definitions on the screen. So it's the freedom or ability to navigate and utilise legal frameworks which regulate social behaviour and to achieve a fair resolution of justice issues. It's the characteristics or competencies necessary to resolve legal problems effectively. The terms commonly used for, the array of knowledge, skills, attributes required for individuals to have an effective opportunity to make a decision about whether and how they want to make use of their justice system. A couple of those definitions come out of work while I was at the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. And we needed to posit a concept of legal capability to try and make sense of some of the data that we were seeing. And so with Pulse, we set about trying to measure some of that to try and deepen our understanding. Sorry. So one of the important insights is that legal capability is a multi-dimensional set of things that influences how people engage with the law. Probably in older conceptions of some access to justice issues, we were focused on just legal literacy. So really the knowledge aspects. Historically, we see this in some of the legal information material and community legal education material, which was really about trying to communicate legal information out of the heads of lawyers into the public. So there was the idea, if we just increase legal knowledge and understanding, people be able to do and achieve more within the legal sphere. But the concept of legal capability is broader than that. We start to realise that there are certain skills, there are certain attributes, attitudes that affect what people do, as well as their access to resources. So previously, I think I've written that sort of a lack of capability in any one of these dimensions can undermine overall capability. So, the key takeaway point here is that legal capability, it's not just about legal knowledge, but there are skills, legal confidence, attribute dimensions that also affect legal capability and behaviour. So legal capability, it's a similar concept to legal literacy or functional legal literacy. Some other work discussing subjective legal empowerment, legal awareness. There's an extensive body of literature on legal consciousness, so how people conceive of and see and engage with the legal world. It's similar and builds on ideas of legal confidence related to ideas of legal socialization, and probably in its functional manifestation, it's very similar to legal actuation. So that's being functional and making use of law within your life. If we think a little bit more broadly, it's similar to some ideas sort of underpinning people's ability with their literacy, with their numeracy, with their self-confidence and self-efficacy. So their own confidence in their ability to do things. It's largely built on the capability approach to disadvantage. So conceptually for us, that's how it was originally built. It's very similar to health literacy, financial literacy, digital literacy. So hopefully that's somewhat familiar to people. And legal capability, it isn't just about individuals, but it's rather about how people and communities are situated within legal institutions and structures. So there are some internal aspects of capability, but one of the things that marks our work is that we recognise that people are situated within wider systems and circumstances, and so it's kind of like the combination of the internal plus the external operating environment goes together to produce some combined capabilities. Sort of look at whether people have, a real opportunity to access a fair resolution process and make use of that. And then sort of the functionings of that is the achievement of just outcomes. So without getting into, any classic 20th century literature, people can't access justice when the doors are locked to them. So legal capability focuses on what people and groups need to make effective use of law in their legal system if they choose to do so. Again, the concept does help us understand and make sense of some of the older studies of legal problem-solving behaviour. Most critically, that's why is it that some take effective action when others struggle to do so, notwithstanding the widespread availability and provision of legal information and assistance. And now we're heading up to 50 years of access to justice, reform after reform after reform. In doing that, we've built a much more complex justice system and legal assistance system. We've been minting more and more dispute and complaint resolution bodies. We've got an ever-growing number of them. They continue to come online. So we're always building new things to do better, quicker, cheaper justice in a whole range of areas. We've had an explosion in the number of ombudsmen in the last 20 years, and we continue to build them. So how did we assess capability? Well, we developed a series of measures to tap into each of the knowledge, the skill and the attitude dimensions of legal capability. So we have measures of general legal knowledge, of legal confidence, the perceived relevance of law. We've got some measures of practical legal literacy, of digital legal capability. We've got some attitude measures of narratives or attitudes to law, which is very much built out of the legal consciousness literature. We've got some measures of the perceived accessibility or inaccessibility of lawyers, trust in lawyers. And we use all of these measures firstly to test a whole range of things to see whether this is related to what people do and achieve, but as well as putting it all together to develop some composite measures. So what I'm going to do today is run through the measures and some of the findings, and then I'll get on to a bit of how they're related to people's behaviour. So for the general legal knowledge measure, what we did is really simple. We asked a series of questions about 5 areas of law. And when we put that all together, this is the distribution we see. So overall, respondents provided correct answers to just over 70% of the questions. They did vary by area of law, as we'd expect. So people were most knowledgeable about neighbour issues. They were least knowledgeable about family law issues. While that's interesting, that's sort of not really the point. The point here really is to look at the distribution of that knowledge across the community. So unsurprisingly, we see that variation, was unequally distributed across the community. And so what we see is some social patterning of general legal knowledge. So knowledge of rights was significantly associated with a number of variables or socio-demographic measures. So both the oldest and the youngest cohorts had the lowest legal knowledge scores. Women scored higher. People with a non-English main language spoken at home scored lower. Carers scored higher. People with a long-term illness or disability also scored higher. And people living in outer regional and remote areas, they also scored higher. Some of these findings may be a little counterintuitive at first, but what they do point to is relatively higher knowledge among some cohorts. And there might be a number of reasons for that, including those cohorts who may have had higher involvement in the particular areas canvassed and or knowledge in being involved in matters, so such as a rented housing matter or an employment matter or a family matter. We also know that some groups and cohorts in the population are engaged with law more because as a matter of necessity in dealing with matters as they arise. So it might not be that surprising that the carers are used to dealing with bureaucracy and law in pursuit of their entitlements. Another measure is our legal confidence measure. So this measures taps into people's confidence in dealing with a significant legal dispute, in presenting them with increasingly demanding scenarios to try and tease out where people move from being confident to being not very confident. And so there's a series of questions to do that. That's on the screen there. I'm not going to go into much detail as to how that measures operating. You can follow that up if you're particularly interested in it. But again, what's interesting is the distribution. So again, we see a distribution across the community where there's a body of around 50% that sort of rates as having sort of medium confidence. There's a bit over a quarter that have high confidence. But there was also a quarter that scored as low confidence. And again, when we look at how that's happening, this screen's a little bit busy, but I'll just run it through it. We see again the youngest and the oldest cohort. They both had highest percentage in falling into that low confidence group. And they also had the lowest percentage falling into the high confidence group. Males had higher confidence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people also had higher confidence. Non-English main language also had higher confidence. Those people who were married or single without children were higher confidence. Carers were higher confidence. People with increasingly severe mental distress, they were higher in the low confidence group and lower in the high confidence group. Interestingly enough, those with higher incomes were less likely to be high confidence. And interestingly, those living in a regional and remote area both fell into higher numbers in the low confidence and high confidence groups. And so, I mean, that's interesting. But when we stop to think about the makeup of communities and the people living in different places, that makes more sense. And is worth keeping in mind as we move through some of the other findings. So practical legal literacy, it's about obtaining information, understanding it, navigating that information, applying that information in everyday justiciable issues. So we developed 6 questions to measure that. It's based on some approaches that's in health literacy. Sorry, just give me 1 sec. It's based on some approaches to health literacy and the insight that some health services can be wasted or even detrimental where patients lack the literacy to correctly follow advice, prescriptions such as the dosage on prescriptions, those sorts of things. And this is something we started writing about in Reshaping Legal Assistance Services, which was a discussion paper following the Legal Australia-wide survey at the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. Here's again the 6 measures. So generally, it's trying to tap into people's experience with handling sort of not legal issues but related matters. So how people go with reading letters, brochures, information, whether people have difficulty with forms, whether they have difficulty understanding written information, whether they have someone often help them, those sorts of things. So again, we use those measures to examine the distribution across the community. Here you'll see a different distribution. So what we see is 30% of people sort of no difficulties at all with any of the things we were measuring. There was a group of about 50% of the population that had adequate literacy, or what we saw as adequate literacy, but they had some some difficulties, but there was this much longer tail of people in this distribution, which is getting towards 20% of the population that had sort of marginal literacy, or what was likely to be inadequate literacy for dealing with legal information and justice resolution tasks. This probably isn't surprising again to anybody with experience of public legal services, and largely follows what we know from some other literacy studies. Again, we find it socially patterned. So those are more likely to fall into the inadequate literacy stratum. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, people with a non-English main language, people with a lower than Year 12 educational achievement, and those experiencing mental distress and financial distress. There's a measure in there of the perceived relevance of law. This is based on the insight that, you know, if you don't see your situations as being legal or the law as being relevant, people are less likely to try and make use of the law and the justice system to deal with those situations. The measures we used were developed out of a previous survey that we did here, our community perceptions of law survey. So we're doing some scale development work. These are the elements that went into that measure. So we asked people, you know, thinking about the following problems: to what extent do you think that the law is relevant to these situations? So there's a series of scenarios there, and people are asked to rate whether they see it as being very relevant, quite relevant, not very relevant, not relevant at all. So there's, this is a developed scale and a developed measure, and when we put it together, this is what we see as the distribution across the community. So again, we see just over a quarter that have high perceived relevance, so they were seeing the law in the scenarios that were put to them. Again, there was a body of about 50% of the community that sort of had a medium perceived relevance score, but there was again almost a quarter that saw had low perceived relevance of law. So yeah, interested. And what we set out to test is whether that was then related to what people had done and achieved with their own problems. Again, we saw strong social patterning of the perceived relevance of law. So there were lower perceived scores for, again, the youngest and the oldest age groups, a non-English main language, those with no caring responsibilities, those with lower educational qualifications. It was lower amongst those living in major cities and larger inner regional areas. Lower relevance for those without a long-term illness or disability, but also lower amongst those with severe mental distress. There's a measure in there around attitude narratives to law. Again, that's based on some developmental work. It taps into the conception of legality and legal consciousness. So in the development work, so there's a separate survey that was done to develop this measure. And that work identified sort of 4 dominant narratives or views about the law. So that the law is remote, that's something arbitrary to be resisted, that it's a practical means of achieving objects, and that it's a game that can be played by people. If you're really interested in that, you'll see the links to the legal consciousness literature. So again, there's a series of measures to tap into this. So it's asking about law in this country. The remote measure includes the items that it's distant to my life, that it's remote and not connected or relevant to me, that it's out of reach. So there are just some really simple and quick items to tap into those 4 dimensions. And again, what's interesting is the distribution. So overall, respondents were most likely to adhere to the practical nature of law. So that was the highest scoring narrative. People are less likely to agree with items that were characterising the law as a game or as remote or something to be resisted. Interestingly, many respondents were adhering to multiple narratives, and we found some quite strong and significant correlations. So one of those was amongst those who saw the law as being remote and also as a game. Again, what's interesting is the way in which it's patterned across the community, and then later on the way in which it affects behaviours. So we see significant difference in adherence to different attitudes, narratives to law by age, by main language spoken, by education, geography. Again, interestingly, those living in an outer regional or remote area scored the lowest in terms of the law being remote or be resisted or as a game, and scored highest in seeing the law as being something practical to get what you deserved, as being good for solving problems and something to be used. We also saw differences by mental distress and financial distress. I'm not going to go into much more detail about how that was patterned. It's a little bit complicated, but I'm sure you're taking the main point here is that it's patterned differently across the community, which affects behaviour. We also set out to test the perceived inaccessibility of law. That was measured through 10 items on the perceived inaccessibility of the lawyer's scale. That was again developed through our work. So it asked a series of questions about lawyers in Victoria, whether they're unapproachable, whether they're too slow, whether they're not worth the hassle. Again, you get the idea that it's distributed differently across the community. Again, we see a group that's got low perceived accessibility of law, some medium scoring, about half the population, and again a quarter that perceive that lawyers as being quite inaccessible to them. Again, it's socially patterned, significantly related to the groups with higher levels of inaccessibility: older people, non-English main language, single parents de facto with children, those with lower educational achievement, those with a long-term illness or disability, those with severe or financial distress. Trust in lawyers, similarly, a series of measures. One of the insights here, certainly one of the things I used to talk about quite often was that 50,000 lawyer jokes can't all be wrong. There's some truth in lawyer jokes in the way that the community generally sees lawyers. But here what we saw is quite high levels of trust in lawyers. So generally speaking, most people did trust them to act in their best interest, to be knowledgeable and skilled, to act ethically, not break rules. We saw a bit more of a divergence across the community in terms of trusting lawyers not to overcharge you, and whether or not they would be trying to exploit loopholes in the law. Again, it's socially patterned. So we see higher trust amongst younger people, women, non-English main language, married people with no children, and those with a caring responsibility, people not working, people with higher educational achievement, people living in outer regional and remote areas, people with lower incomes. Lower trust amongst those with a long-term illness or disability, with mental and financial distress. Similarly, a measure of legal capability delves into things that people have done in a tech world, which are analogous to having to deal with legal tasks. And we used those scores to predict those likely to require higher levels of support interacting with law digitally. Again, we see about half the population that sort of came out scoring as not likely to need supports, but the other 50% either needing minor or major support. Again, just over a quarter coming out as looking like they would need major support. By now, you should be well and truly aware that this is likely to be socially patterned, and absolutely what we found here is that the group likely to need major support in terms of dealing with legal matters in a digital environment were older people, non-English main language, people not working, people with lower education. In this case, it was people living in regional and remote areas, people with lower incomes. So putting that all together, one of the composite measures, we can see variability amongst different cohorts in terms of their positive or negative attitude to law and their higher and low levels of skills. So the quadrant that we might be most concerned about is that quadrant that's both lower skills and more negative attitudes to law. And some of the cohorts falling into that were those aged 65 and over, those with lower than year 12 educational achievement, and those experiencing financial and severe mental distress. So beginning to put all of this together, what we see is some poor legal skills, low legal confidence and negative attitudes, all limiting people's ability to deal with justiciable problems, and consequently their prospects for a just resolution. I think it's important to realise here, nobody has perfect legal capability. It ebbs and flows over time, but critically there are some that have more than others, that legal capability is not equally distributed across the community. So just like vulnerability to justiciable problems is evidence of social patterning, it's linked to disadvantage, but it's not all about disadvantage. Rather, inequality of capability, it does add an extra layer to access to justice barriers. So just sort of rolling through and recapping on that, what we see is a sizable group, roughly around 18 to 26%, that's low legal confidence. This is not necessarily the same people in each of these categories as you would have seen as we went through the social patterning, but across all of these measures, roughly, 22, 1/5 to a quarter of the population that are low legal confidence or low perceived relevance of law, inadequate or marginal practical legal literacy, likely to require major support to do common online tasks, and with a perceived inaccessible, or who see lawyers as being inaccessible to them. So overall, reasonable capability to engage with justice institutions for most, but this sizable group across one or more of these dimensions with heightened capability needs. So yeah, of particular concern, those with both low skill, confidence and negative attitudes. So Pulse shows that some people are more likely to be reluctant to engage with law and to face difficulty obtaining what they need if and when they do. So that brings us sort of up to the third report in this series, which really explores the nexus between legal need and capability. So when it comes to what people do, whether they took action, whether they handled things alone, whether they used informal, independent or legal help, whether there were any legal processes involved, whether they were initiating those processes, or were on sort of having the law used against them, so being on the receiving end of law and processes, how long the problems lasted, whether people were able to get all the help they needed, and whether or not they were satisfied with the outcome or process of their matters, and then ultimately whether or not their legal needs were met. Legal capability was typically significant and pivotal. So it's a really important factor for understanding legal problem solving behaviours and diverse legal problem solving behaviour and achievement across the whole of the community. So I'm just going to run through a couple of data points that are interesting. So here's just a brief snapshot. Again, there's a lot more detail in the reports. So here on this slide, we can see how the highest perceived relevance of law, scoring higher, behave differently. Where there was a higher perceived relevance of law, people were able to handle matters alone at higher rates themselves. So where there's lower perceived relevance of law, it was funneling to both independent help and legal services. Now, we might see that as being a good thing, that the services that we're providing having to make up for the perceived relevance of law's difference. We probably go into more details into the report as to some of the complicating factors there. But the takeaway point here is that it's whether people see the law as being relevant or not was reflected in their behaviours. Particularly concerning would be where people don't see the law as being relevant. We can see there's a higher rate of doing nothing in response. This is a bit more busy slide going on here, but here, this is the relationship between the legal capability measures to do with skills and confidence and attitude, and whether or not courts and tribunals were involved, and whether or not matters were being initiated by the survey respondent or not. Again, what we can see is that those with more negative attitudes and with lower skills were more likely to have matters involved in courts and tribunals. When it comes to initiating those matters, it was the reverse. It's actually those with more positive attitudes that were initiating actions, particularly those with higher levels of skill and confidence that were initiating matters. And when we stop to think about it, that makes perfect common sense. This is interesting. This shows how legal capabilities related to problem duration. Here, this is the practical legal literacy measure. So we can see that those with lower levels of practical legal literacy, well, it's quite distinct. Their matters last a lot longer. So the red line there, you can see that, even after 5 years people with lower levels of practical legal literacy had much higher rates of problems persisting. So about half their problems were still ongoing 5 years later, compared to those who didn't have any legal literacy challenges. Well, they only had about 20% of problems left. That's a huge difference. Legal capability was also strongly related to whether people were able to get the help that they needed. So here on the composite measure of skill and confidence. So those with the highest skill and confidence reported much higher rates of agreeing, strongly agreeing, or agreeing that they got all the help that they needed, whereas those with the lowest skill and the lowest confidence had much higher rates of disagreeing that they had been able to do that. And then perhaps unsurprisingly, we see that reflected further in satisfaction with outcomes or progress. So again, this is the practical legal literacy measure. So those with inadequate or marginal practical legal literacy are much higher rates of not being happy with the outcome or progress of their matter compared to those who had higher levels of practical legal literacy. Ultimately, yeah, this is all reflected in legal need and whether legal needs were met or not. So here, with the composite skill measure, with the composite attitude measure, we can show that the highest levels of unmet legal need were amongst those with negative or the most negative attitudes, and the lower levels of skill. These slides will be, available after, and you can delve into this in a little more detail and see it. But yeah, I think the overall the report provides a really important new perspective on legal need and access to justice. So legal capability measures were related to nearly every aspect of legal problem, experience, handling, resolution. There's some really interesting challenges here that lower capability meant more difficulty for people extracting value out of the services and their interactions with the justice system. While unmet needs was routine, the capability was strongly related to whether or not people were able to get out of the justice system and achieve what they wanted to achieve. Here, legal capability can take on a more vicious or virtuous guise. So those with lower skill, confidence, more negative attitudes, a little bit of a cycle of lower skill, higher unmet need, poorer outcomes, more negative attitude, being legally excluded, and the opposite also appeared to be true. So there's a capability asymmetry here that it's important to be aware of. And so legal capability appears to have a role in many of the inequalities that we see in the experience and resolution of problems. It appears to underpin and reinforce some demographic differences. Importantly, the asymmetric skills and confidence can lead different people down different paths to justice, and it leads to different outcomes. So I think taking capability seriously is one important new approach to ensure that the justice system doesn't reproduce and amplify that asymmetry and doesn't reinforce advantage and disadvantage within the community. It points to a need for more people-centred justice approaches that better recognise and respond to that diverse legal need and capability across the community. Importantly, once again, this is suggesting that there's no one-size-fits-all services and solutions and processes, but that considering capability is really key for a better, more tailored fit of services to people and for realising access to a fair resolution. And yeah, thank you. I have to head off in a bit, but I've got some time for any questions that are there before I understand you guys will continue to have a discussion.
Tutu.
Hello,
Hello. Hi, Hugh. You can hear us?
I can.
Yeah, great. Oh, cool. My name's Demir. I'm from Community Legal Centres, New South Wales, and I just had a question about data around housing tenure and access to justice. So
Yeah.
I know Tenants Victoria did they released a paper last month about single parents in the private rental market, and they had relatively high literacy about their legal rights, but they had low confidence and didn't pursue those rights because they were like, well, I mean, I can't get no grounds evicted, but I can still get a rent increase that is tantamount to an eviction. Is there stuff in your report that like breaks down capability and confidence in the system according to tenure type?
Interestingly enough, we funded that project, and interestingly enough, I am crunching some similar data at the moment. So we are looking at housing, status housing tenure by both nature of need, and some of these legal capability dimensions. Yeah, it was striking. So I was actually at the launch of that report, and yes, it was really, really fascinating for me being able to see some of these dimensions of legal capability coming to life, because I think you've actually, absolutely nailed one of the important things, that the sort of the literacy and skill, and even some of the knowledge of the law and the process can absolutely be trumped by the confidence and some of the emotional aspects in the circumstances. And when it comes to housing related need, particularly in a housing crisis environment, people can be really reluctant to get into a dispute with a more powerful, it brings to light the power imbalance between landlord and tenant. And yeah, I think it's a really great example of being mindful that people don't just need straight legal information, but other forms of support as well to action their rights and make their rights substantive for them in their circumstances.
Hi, Hugh. It's Kate from the Law and Justice Foundation. How are you going?
Hi, Kate. How are you?
Good. I just wanted to add something based on research. We've just very recently finished with NCAT looking at the tenancy list experiences at the tribunal, and we did a small qualitative study as part of that with people as they were coming out of their hearing, and it really reflected that issue as well. So some of the tenants, we did the interviews with self-represented landlords or tenants, but some of those tenants were so knowledgeable about the Tenancy Act in particular, and had really like done their homework. Like it was really quite incredible, their knowledge and the preparation they'd put in. But yeah, when they got into like conciliation rooms, for example, were just so overwhelmed and daunted, and like, kind of articulated as they came out exactly how they'd been aggrieved by the process, but weren't able to kind of confidently manage that in that space. So yeah, some of that qualitative research really backs that up too.
Yeah, I think that's so true. some of the classic studies, access to justice studies, so, you know, going back 20, 30 years, also reflect that the power imbalance between these processes, between we might describe them as being sort of people trying to make use of a process for the first time, as opposed to those who are doing it frequently. And again, in the tenancy, we see a power imbalance between those going off to the tenancy or the residential tenancies list for the first time, compared to either landlords or estate agents who might have been through it multiple times. And so can be a bit of a difference between sort of understanding the law and your rights in a situation, but then being completely unfamiliar with the process, and the process itself can affect people differently, and those who have been through it more often, just more au fait with it and able to perhaps wield it to their advantage.
So Hugh, I'm thinking as a community educator, how do we adjust what we do, rather than doing general knowledge of the law? Should we be adjusting and doing more on process and providing that confidence in a different way? Like, how do you present your evidence in CAT, for example? Is that the road that we should be taking?
I think it's being aware of some of the capability dimensions and the confidence and the skills. So it may be a bit of it is helping people to actually do some of the practical skill tasks, like lodge papers, get them accurate, complete, that sort of stuff. So giving people confidence, but also just making people aware that these processes exist. They are created for people like you. They can be daunting and confronting at first, but you can do it. And there are services available to help you. Obviously, this is me putting aside all the demand issues and all of that stuff where we perhaps don't have ability to meet everybody, but I think you're absolutely right. Helping to build people's confidence in their own ability to engage with the law, and giving people a bit more of an understanding of the process, how long it might take, that it might not be, your matter might be adjourned a few times, that it might, there'll be ebbs and flows. And that the tasks that you might have to do to help yourself can be worth it in the long run. One of the things we know from some other studies to do with residential tenancies matters, for example, is just turning up to the hearing. You are likely, even if you end up getting evicted, you're likely to be evicted on more favourable grounds than you otherwise would be if you didn't turn up at all. So there's an opportunity to, I guess the equivalent is kind of like mitigate the sentence. And generally people will get a better outcome by turning up than not turning up. So where people are fearful of the process, can be really important to sort of just communicate that basic insight that, yeah, you'll generally be better off if you turn up.
I guess, one of the pertinent questions I have is has the legal capability study in Victoria actually influenced service delivery, particularly amongst the CLC sector?
Yeah, amongst the CLC sector it is. So, I mean, I've been talking about legal capability for a long time. I can say that the CLE community legal education and information space is one of the spaces in which the legal capability work has shaped things even before we had Pulse, but Pulse has given renewed insight. So I was at a Victorian Community Development and CLE forum the other day where we were talking about some of these things. And there's been, renewed interest in re-examining a whole range of material with these sorts of insights in mind. And it also gives a renewed focus on thinking about the different needs, the different capabilities of different groups, and then producing the right sort of material for them. Because a single size, I hate to be the bearer of the bad news when it comes to this, but there's no, single shot magical solution to a lot of things. We probably need things in multiple forms that are trying to do slightly different things for different cohorts for different users. But potentially more attuned community legal education, more attuned legal information materials that land for people across that legal capability spectrum. So some people may need some bolstering and supports for some of the confidence aspects. Others may need some other sorts of framing of material. I think the key insight really is that it's not just about legal information. So it's not just about getting a lawyer or legally trained professional and trying to download everything they know out of their head into the heads of others, and being more mindful of those wider dimensions that shape behaviour.
I guess the other question I would have in terms of, has there been any influence on funding bodies and how data is collected, access to justice, you've got legal advice, tick, and that's not, no, that's not good enough. It's not reflecting a just resolution to a
In short, yes, there's some developmental stuff that's going on. So one of the things we're particularly interested in is using some of the legal capability insights at triage and assessment triage referral, both internally and sort of externally. So in theory and ideally, if you had a good insight on what people are able to do and achieve with different levels of service or different service models, you can begin to triage those who may need lower or higher levels of support to different levels of service. We think that's a pathway to optimizing, but we're not there yet, and there's much more learning that needs to happen. So we just need to get a better grip on what outcomes different service models, different service levels are achieving for different types of people, and build an evidence base around that. And then we can more confidently triage. I mean, it's a little bit Harry Potter, right, in terms of putting people into a sorting hat to get them to the right service channel for them and their circumstances. And this is, the more sophisticated approaches to more people-centered approaches to the provision of legal assistance. And so we know this globally. It's a growing trend around the world. Everyone's struggling with the same sort of challenges, and the insights around being more people-centered being the pathway to achieving that. Sorry, I'm going to have to apologise and duck out. I've got another commitment to get to. But yeah, hopefully you can continue the discussion there.
Okay, so I think we can continue the discussion if you have something you would like to add.
My question was basically to probably everyone. I wanted to know how, like, I know the data was there for a lot to see. My question was, how did we get the data? Were they on the way in or were they on the way out from legal service? Because people on the way in are in a matter of distress and they're under the pump, the pressure's there, and your answers are going to be very different on the way out to when they are on the way in. Everyone that I see is in a state of like chaos and they're needing help and assistance. And I know, like, I was looking at a lot of the data and I was like, oh, geez, that's very different to the way I see community in my area with some of the stuff. Now, when he was speaking, I was completely agreeing with a lot of the stuff that he was saying with intake and triage in that being a pathway and being fluid with your CLEs and being adaptive to the community that you're in. But I wanted to know what like other people think in that area because I know I'm a community engagement officer, so my job is to be the voice between the community and the legal practice that I work with. So common terminology, understanding how we can do things together better, understanding how legal legal people talk differently to people in the community and the difference between the two. Like I often see the spiral of one thing leading to 50 things that leads escalating downwards. So that's just what I thought. So.
Kate over here. That might can answer that.
I'm here as backup crew for for Hugh's work today. I'm given that the Law and Justice Foundation and Victoria Law Foundation are pretty good friends. So I can maybe address the first part of that, and then over to you, wise people, for those deeper issues about the people's experience in engaging with you. In terms of the methodology of the survey that Hugh described, I think what's really valuable about Pulse and about legal needs surveys more generally is that those questions are asked of the general population. So people answer those questions whether or not they identify as having a legal problem, because often what we know about in the service sector, or a lot of the data we have, is only about people who access services, right? Like we don't know anything about the people who don't come through your doors. So the kind of surveying that Hugh described and legal needs surveys tell us about those people who aren't coming in the door as well. So we can get some insight, beyond people's experience in crisis, because we know that's a really heightened moment and it's really difficult to get that broad assessment. So I think that's part of the value of what Hugh has described, is that those people that have been surveyed represent general population, whether or not people identify their problem as legal or not, and whether or not they've accessed legal support. So that's part of the usefulness. But I'll leave it to others to perhaps respond to those deeper points about, like what it means for people in the moment of crisis and when they're going in and out of services, because it's all good and well to talk about legal capability when we're, calm and thinking straight, but that's not often the point when you're engaging with people. Did anyone else want to respond to that? I'll hand over the mic. Or ask another question, indeed.
So sorry, the question was, does that cover all of Victoria? All the communities, or just in Melbourne?
Sorry, I think we're just using the mics for online people. Is that right?
Yep,
Sarah?
that's it.
That's whole of Victoria. So they did that that survey across the whole population of Victoria, and use sampling methods to get a kind of representative sample of people. Which is why I guess that's quite unique, is that it's telling us something about the whole population, and that's why we can kind of look at those patterns in ways that we might not otherwise be able to. So geographic spread of ages, spread of a whole bunch of demographic characteristics factored into that survey. But and as Hugh said, there's a lot of stuff there that there's no reason to think that wouldn't be the same in New South Wales, but also we know that there's stuff that's different and very context specific. So, that's why I and probably lots of other people in this room are advocates for a new national legal needs survey as well. So we can actually look at some of that context specific stuff as well.
I think also, Hugh would acknowledge that this is just the beginning of, legal capability and identifying the factors that would impact on legal capability and, having actually looked at all of the reports that, trauma wasn't wasn't taken into consideration, and that we know that would be have a massive impact on, how people utilize the legal system or are able to utilize the legal system. So it's really just a start, but I'm excited about, taking it into consideration and adjusting what we do. And there are probably quite a few things that we already do that do reflect legal capability in our own service delivery, but there's probably a lot that we need to adjust as well. So I don't know, do we want to have a conversation about that, or, what people already do in their services, but, how can we make small steps to reflect legal capability more within the resources that we have, because we're not going to have our resources expanded because of this, because of what we're finding in terms of how people utilize the legal services. Yeah.
You asked a question down the front about the CLCs in Victoria. Did they get the feedback? How are they coping with it? Are they improving or aren't they improving? Are they still lacking, not servicing the people on the, like to access legal advice, for anything? Is there any outcome of that, or no?
I am not the best placed
No,
person
that's all good.
to answer that, but I would say these findings are pretty new as well, and I certainly and there may be others in the room who know a bit more about this, but I certainly know that the CLC sector has been really engaged, and understandably so. I mean, I think CLCs are uniquely placed actually around the legal capability stuff as a kind of approach to work. I mean, I think the way that you do what you do, there is a unique positioning among CLCs around this. I don't know if other people wanted to respond about.
Well, I would hope the findings, in Victoria would inspire us in New South Wales also to make some adjustments of our services to take into account legal capability and act accordingly. I'm certainly excited by it and inspired by it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I'm from a CLC that sits on the border of Victoria and New South Wales, so we're the Hume Riverina Community Legal Service. And I think that the pulse surveys, the law surveys, they all inform us in the way that we work, and it gives us the voice to be able to advocate when we're doing submissions, when we're asking for funding. We can draw upon this research that informs the way we work. An example of the way we work now is rather than expecting people to come in our door, we're actually going out to where people are. We're working really holistically with partners in the community, and each and every one of us are doing that. And we really lean on them to help us to build that capacity. We don't get more funding, but I think that the way that we work with clients, and particularly I've been in this area for 14 years, and the way that we work now is so very, very, very differently and good differently than the way that we have in the past. Does that help? But yeah.
I work in the family law, family violence area, and I guess the clients I meet are often like up here. And so it's a matter of really working with them and working out what they need in terms of, do they need more appointments, or do they need, written advice, or it's kind of a lot of meeting them where they're at, in terms of, working with them. I guess that's just to talk about the other question. One question I had was that the rural regional area, there was a high trust in the legal system and high confidence, which surprised me. Like, do you have anything comments on that or?
Only hypotheses really, and we did a session with Hugh and Nigel Balmer, who worked on the Pulse survey as well last year, and that was one of the questions that came up, and one of those kind of maybe counterintuitive seeming findings. And one hypothesis is perhaps that in smaller communities, like the actual lawyers are known, and they're not kind of, anonymous faces, the offices are in the main street that people walk past. But perhaps some of you have much better insights than me about that, because this, we're kind of hypothesizing about what that means. What do you reckon it means?
I was surprised, but Ellie might have.
That's better fun.
Hi, yeah. So I also work at the Hume Riverina Community Legal Service, and I work in a health justice partnership with the Aboriginal Health Service up in Albury-Wodonga. And I guess we are very lucky in that program that I work in was funded to also have some academic research alongside it. So we've had 3 evaluations, like independent evaluations, done over the 3 years of the program about how it's going. And a lot of the feedback and a lot of the research is based around that building of trust and how you build trust with community. And the initial report, so I'd only probably been working in that program for about 3 months before the initial report happened. So it was a very initial stage. And there was a lot of mistrust about the legal system and the legal processes in general. But over the 3 years of working there and working, with the staff members at the service and in community, we've seen a drastic increase in the amount of trust that's had. HRCLS is very lucky, and we've had that relationship with the Aboriginal Health Service, AWAS, for about 10 years. But yeah, I think the continuity of having the same workers, so myself and my colleague who's a community development worker, has really elevated how much trust we have in that service, and that we're there, place-based 3 days a week at the health service. But that's all the work that we do. So we're in that program 5 days a week, but we're there 3 days a week. And I think, that trust is really important because they know who we are. Like, those workers will say, oh, we'll introduce you to Gabby, or Gabby can help you with that. And so a lot of it is that familiar face. And a big part of the work that we do is not just in the legal service. So it's not just doing advices, it's not being a lawyer. It's about going out and having cups of tea and sitting at the men's shed and going to the women's yarning circle and attending staff meetings for the health service. We go to like the specific social emotional wellbeing team meeting, but we also go to the all staff meeting. We're there for any significant event that happens. Even if it's not on a day where we're normally at the health service, we just make sure that whenever something big is happening, we are there and people see us and they know who we are. So I think, a lot of that is really big in building that trust and that capability. But something else I wanted to comment on about when you were mentioning before about how you kind of communicate and, like, I guess what community want to hear and understand is different to how we talk as lawyers. So my colleague and I, we used to have like a cuppa date with the family violence team at the health service. So we go like once a month and just chat with them about issues they had or questions. Sorry. And one thing that came out of that is that they had no idea about victims of crime compensation applications. And so we were like, oh, that's like a huge area of law. It's quite easy. And so we actually then had multiple catch-ups with them to develop a small resource that they could use to talk with their their clients about. So the women that were coming in to access their service, they could use it to kind of go through the basics. So it was a helpful tool for them as a worker to understand that process and the supports available. But it was also we co-designed it with them so that they could then give it to that person to take away with them and give them the basic information. It was also a really good, useful tool for us that we did community education with the staff members in the clinic team and the social and emotional wellbeing team at the health service. And we ran through like a case study of like a client coming in, this was the problem, and here's how we would use this resource to talk with them about their options. And now, since doing that, took like probably about 3 or 4 months for us to get the resource developed and to do the education. But since then, probably 80 to 90% of the work that I do is victims of crime compensation, because that information is just filtered out across those workers, and they all know that that's something that we can help with. And now our referrals for that is just huge. So that's like another way that I guess you can do that education and build that capability. Is we're still doing all the legal parts of it, but just getting that information and that confidence that no, this is something that can help with, and here's a resource that we did together, was really, really helpful.
About 30 lessons there about how to actually build legal capability, and such a good reminder that it's not static, right? Like you can actually grow and build and improve legal capability. Yeah.
Natalie from Mid North Coast Legal Centre. I am community engagement and evaluation worker, and also work in our Health Justice Partnership LAMP, which is a legal and mental health partnership program. And I guess just backing up, a lot of my role is just sitting in spaces and talking to people and having lots of cups of teas and meeting them where they're at. And we might not even talk about a legal issue. It's just we're talking life, and it's a bit of a slow burn work of building trust and respectful relationships. And the other part of my role is I try to get to as many networks and interagencies as I can across our catchment, which is sort of Taree up to Coffs Harbour. I can't get to them all, and it's about turning up, and it's about where that is, that's legal information. And I'm not a solicitor, so I have to be really careful in those environments. And often my first statement is, I'm not a solicitor, so anything I say is not legal advice. But it's around, do you know what, I'm going to ask a solicitor and get back to you. Is that going to be okay for you if you've got time? And so there's a lot of that work. I get a lot of workers contacting me on my work mobile, asking on behalf of a client, and I'll go, sounds like a legal issue. Has your client got time for me to go and find out if it's something we can help with? If it's something we can't help with, then we'll be able to refer you to an appropriate service. So it's just that work of doing what you say you're going to do in community, and you're there, and you're not kind of there as a specialist service, you're there as part of the community. And I also think there's a lot of that in regional and rural and remote spaces, is you live and work in your communities as well. And so you have these different connections that you potentially don't get in your bigger urban centres as well. But yeah, it's just people learning to trust you because you do what you say you're going to do.
Probably just a follow up on both of those. One of the strategies that we're starting to do a lot more is train the trainer. So we're going out to the service providers and teaching them legal spotting. When they're listening to the story and not necessarily interrupting, but making sure that they capture, okay, that might be a welfare rights issue. That might be a seniors rights thing. That might be something of police abuse. Okay, we might refer that to Redfern. And just saying, okay, these 3 legal things, and we've developed some really like non-invasive questions, simple things like, do you have any government documents where they've requested information? And they're like, oh, you might be having the conversation with them to say, oh, because no one knows the difference between civil law, consumer, crime, traffic, and that gets lost in community things. So I think if we can break down, because there's lots of service providers who want to help, and that messaging you on your mobile, that happens to me all the time, constantly. Oh, Chris, can you get them onto this? Absolutely, and you want to help them, but I'd rather teach the service providers to open the pathway for them. I think that's a road that we can collectively make a little bit better for us.
A lot of that work, and I guess that was, influenced by the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales findings that, people will go to a generalist service provider before they will come to a legal service. And so I guess, based on PIAC Queensland's legal health checks, we created one for ourselves, and that's how we educate service providers to identify that their clients might have a legal issue, and then provide those appropriate pathways of referral pathways. And that's been really, really successful. And I guess that comes to that legal capability and the understanding of the relevance of the law. So we do depend on generalist service providers to facilitate access to legal services. And in having listened to Hugh's presentation, also I thought that perhaps we could even take that one step further, where we might not have the resources to do case management to a large degree, where those clients are already being case managed. That that case management could we strengthen those partnerships, and that case management can also facilitate the supporting that person through the legal processes. So that takes it just to another level, I guess.
Can I just mention one thing that I noticed wasn't in Hugh's presentation with the capability stuff, was how many of those people have a cognitive disability or cognitive impairment, whether it be, a neurodiverse condition, or whether it's an acquired brain injury, whatever. But yeah, because that's where I sit. I work with the Intellectual Disability Rights Service as part of the Justice and Advocacy Service crew, and that's what we focus on, working with people that have cognitive impairment that are in the criminal system, in the justice system. And like, it's since starting, it's like when you get a new car and everywhere you go, you see someone driving the same car as you. And then, so once I started working with the Jazz Mob, I like just by, observing what's going on around me in other communities, how many people that have cognitive impairment that are in the system, and how police seem to target people with cognitive disability, whether it's because they don't understand their rights, or they don't understand the details of like their AVO or whatever it is that they're in trouble with. And yeah, so I thought that was sort of a bit that sort of got missed in Hugh's presentation, that is a bit of a gap there. That a lot of these people that have not a very good education, or low socioeconomic, a lot of these people have some sort of cognitive disability. And so that's sort of an area that really sort of needs a lot of support, because a lot of people don't like to admit that they have a cognitive disability, with that, because it, same around the mental health, it brings a lot of stigma, and people are already discriminated against enough. So adding another layer of discrimination, they're not going to want to, fess up to that in a hurry. So, that's a big gap that I see where people fall through the cracks. And we're also, the IDRS are also doing a lot of training the trainer, where, we're trying to get solicitors on board, trying to get police on board, to actually just become more aware of how people with cognitive disability are they're everywhere, but they're a lot of the time hidden, because, people don't want to advertise this stuff. And yeah, so that's something I think is really important, and that people need to be more aware of. And yeah, and my apologies too, because I've been in and out for the whole session. But yeah, that's just my little 2 cents worth.
Thank you.
I think it's time for lunch too, by the way.
Thank you, everybody.